I need you to imagine something uncomfortable. You're watching someone die, but you don't know it yet. Neither do the 300 people watching with you. Neither do the people in the room with him. And here's the thing that's going to stay with you long after we're done here. Some of those 300 people, they paid for this moment. Not for his death, specifically. They didn't know that's what they were buying. But they paid for something. August 18th, 2025. A village in southeastern France called Caen. One of those Mediterranean hill towns where the mountains meet the sea. 46-year-old Raphaël Graven, known online as Jean Pormanove, stops responding during a live stream. He's been broadcasting continuously for nearly 12 days. 298 hours of his life, transmitted in real time to anyone willing to watch. And then he dies. But this isn't a story about death. Not really. This is a story about watching. About being watched. About the strange contract we make when we turn human suffering into entertainment. And it starts, like so many modern tragedies, with a question nobody wanted to ask. What were we really paying for? Let me take you back to December 15th, 2024. 8 months before Raphaël dies. A French investigative outlet called Mediapart publishes an exposé. The headline translates roughly to "The Abuse Business," inside France's dark, live streaming world. The reporters have been watching these streams. Hours and hours of them. And what they documented wasn't entertainment. It was exploitation. Vulnerable people, some with cognitive disabilities, subjected to humiliations. For donations. For views. For whatever we call attention when it gets monetized. The streams centered around Raphaël Graven and 2 co-streamers. Owen Senazandati, who went by Naruto, and Safin Hamadi, known simply as Safin. The article names other participants too, people identified only by pseudonyms. Kadu is one name that appears repeatedly in the reporting. These were described as vulnerable individuals. People who, for reasons we're still trying to understand, kept coming back. By January 2025, prosecutors in Nice had opened preliminary investigations. The charges being explored: violence against vulnerable persons, endangerment, dissemination of violent images. So when Raphaël dies in August, this isn't some bolt from nowhere. The authorities already had their eyes on this world. They just hadn't moved fast enough. Now here's where it gets psychologically complicated. Raphaël himself, the man who would die on camera, defended this content. In clips and statements, he described parts of it as staged. Performance. Consensual theater. So what do you do with that? How do you investigate abuse when the victim insists it's acting? How do you protect someone who says they don't need protection? Raphaël Graven was 46 years old. Some outlets report he was a former soldier. That's almost all the biographical detail that made it into the coverage. 46 years reduced to a screen name, a death, and a controversy. But I want you to think about that age for a moment. 46. Old enough to have lived entire lives before the internet existed as we know it. Old enough to remember when broadcast to yourself required a television studio, not just a phone. He'd been streaming for years before that final marathon, building an audience, refining whatever dark alchemy kept people watching. And he had health problems, pre-existing cardiac issues, thyroid conditions, the kind of medical vulnerabilities that make a 12-day marathon something other than a stunt, something actively dangerous. Did he know that? Did the people watching know that? Did the people in the room with him? Here's what we know for certain. Somewhere during hour 298, his body made a decision his mind couldn't override. The autopsy would later show no signs of trauma, no blows, no physical violence from another person. But something killed him. There's a detail in the reporting that I can't stop thinking about. During certain streams associated with this channel, viewers donated approximately 36,000 euros. That's not the total across all streams. That's a figure cited for particular broadcasts. 36,000 euros. People paid to trigger specific acts. The reporting describes a pay-to-humiliate dynamic. You donate, something happens. The more you pay, the more extreme it gets. Now, I need you to sit with that for a second. Because this isn't a dark web story. This wasn't hidden on some encrypted server accessible only to criminals. This was on Kick, A mainstream streaming platform. Public. Searchable. Recommended by algorithms. The audience wasn't a shadowy cabal. It was regular people. People who might look like you. Who might be you in a different mood on a different night, 3 clicks down a different rabbit hole. And here's the question that should make you uncomfortable. If you'd stumbled onto this stream at hour 70 or hour 150 or hour 290, would you have kept watching? Would you have donated? Would you have told someone? Or would you have just scrolled on? Because that's what most people did. For 12 days, people watched. Some paid. Some commented. Some probably felt vaguely uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to act. And then a man died. And suddenly everyone wanted to know, who's responsible for this? August 19th through 22nd. The autopsy. In the immediate aftermath, social media filled with speculation. Accusations. People were convinced Raphaël had been killed on camera. Beaten. Assaulted. The psychological need for that narrative makes sense, doesn't it? If someone struck him, we'd have a villain. A clear crime. A straightforward moral universe where cause and effect line up neatly. But the medical examiner found no trauma. No injuries consistent with assault. The official statement. No evidence the death was caused by a blow from another person. So everyone who'd been watching those clips, convinced they'd witnessed murder, they'd witnessed something else entirely. Death by marathon. Death by spectacle. Death by the slow accumulation of choices that individually looked like freedom, but collectively looked like something much darker. The toxicology results were still pending when the last reports came out in September. We don't know yet what substances, if any, were in his system. We don't know the exact physiological mechanism that stopped his heart, but we know what didn't kill him, another person's hands. Which means the question of responsibility just got infinitely more complicated. The police seized equipment, computers, hard drives containing hours of footage. Imagine being the investigator assigned to watch all of that. Hour after hour of human degradation, trying to determine what's real, what's staged, where's the line between performance and abuse. Because Raphaël and his co-streamers maintained this was content. Entertainment. Yes, it was dark, but it was consensual. The participants knew what they were signing up for. But the Mediapart investigation documented something else. Vulnerable people, cognitive disabilities, potential coercion masked as participation. So you're an investigator, and you're watching footage of someone being humiliated. They're not fighting back. Sometimes they're even laughing. But you have testimony suggesting they didn't fully understand what was happening, that they were dependent on these streamers in some way. That saying no wasn't really an option. How do you prove coercion when the coercion is invisible, when it's psychological rather than physical? And here's where the investigation took its most significant turn. The French government decided this wasn't just about the individuals in that room. On August 26th and 27th, French officials announced plans to sue Kik itself, not just for hosting the content, but for negligence, for failing to comply with French law and the EU Digital Services Act. The argument: Kik had a legal obligation to remove or flag content that endangered life and personal safety. And they didn't. For 12 days, a man broadcast what would become his own death. And the platform's moderation systems, human and algorithmic, never stopped it. Think about the psychological implications of that. We've built systems that can detect copyrighted music in seconds, that can identify faces in crowds, that can predict what you'll want to watch next with eerie accuracy. But they couldn't detect a man dying in real time. Or maybe worse. They could, but the metric said to keep the stream running. I need to tell you something that might complicate your feelings about Raphaël. He defended this content actively. In past statements and clips, he insisted parts of the channel's output were staged, that people who said it was abuse didn't understand the performance, that everyone involved was there voluntarily. There are psychological frameworks for understanding this. Cognitive dissonance, sunk cost, the need to believe our suffering has meaning. Or maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe it was staged. But then we have to ask, staged for whom? And at what cost? Because even if every humiliation was scripted, even if every vulnerable participant consented with full understanding, which the Mediapart investigation suggests they didn't, even then, people believed it was real. €36,000 suggests people believed it was real. So we build a machine that runs on authentic human suffering, and the defense is that we fake the suffering? Does that make it better? Does that make us less complicit? Raphaël Graven was 46 years old. He had heart problems. He had thyroid issues. He chose to broadcast continuously for 12 days. Was that suicide? Was that recklessness? Was that addiction to attention, to validation, to the only form of existence that felt real anymore? I don't know, but I know this. By the time his body gave out, the line between Raphaël and Jean Pormanove had dissolved completely. He was the performance. The performance was him. And when the performance stopped, so did he. The question isn't just who killed Raphaël Graven. It's who was Raphaël Graven after years of being Jean Pormanove? Let's talk about Kick. The platform responded to the death by banning the accounts of Owen Senizandati and Safin Hamadi, the two co-streamers who were in the room when Raphaël died. They issued statements about cooperation with investigators. They talked about reviewing French-language moderation. But here's what they didn't do. They didn't explain how a 12-day marathon of escalating humiliation and visible physical deterioration made it through their content moderation at all. Kick is registered in Australia. That geographical distance is part of their business model. It allows them to host content that might get flagged faster on platforms based in Europe or North America. But the Digital Services Act doesn't care where you're registered. If you operate in the EU, you're subject to EU law. You have obligations. One of those obligations, if content on your platform endangers someone's life or safety, you have to act. Kick's position seems to be that they can't monitor everything, that they rely on reports, that they're not responsible for what users choose to broadcast. The French government's position, that's not good enough. This is unprecedented territory. Governments have gone after platforms for copyright violations, for data privacy breaches, for antitrust violations. But holding a platform criminally or civilly liable for the death of a user who chose to broadcast himself to death, that's new, and it opens questions that extend far beyond this case. When does hosting become enabling? When does neutrality become negligence? If an algorithm recommends content that kills someone, who wrote the murder weapon? The user or the engineer who tuned the algorithm? Remember the names I mentioned earlier? Kadu and others, pseudonyms for vulnerable participants who appeared on these streams? The Mediapart investigation documented their treatment. Humiliations, degradations, acts they apparently participated in willingly, but under circumstances that make willingly a complicated word. Some reportedly had cognitive disabilities. Some were experiencing homelessness or financial desperation. Some were just lonely, and this channel gave them attention, even if that attention was cruel. They're still alive, as far as we know, but the reporting describes them as victims. Of what exactly? Of fraud? Of exploitation? Of a kind of psychological captivity where you're technically free to leave, but psychologically cannot? The investigation into violence against vulnerable persons that started in January is still ongoing. No formal charges have been publicly announced against Owen or Safin as of the latest reporting in September. But those investigations matter, maybe even more than the question of Raphael's death. Because Raphael's case can be complicated by his agency, his defense of the content, his possible complicity in his own demise. But the others? The people documented being humiliated who maybe didn't fully understand what was happening. That's less ambiguous. That's where the criminal law might actually have teeth. And it raises the question, how many people does a live stream have to hurt before we stop calling it entertainment? €36,000. I keep coming back to that number because it's not just money. It's a transaction, a market. Someone in that audience had money to spend. They went online, found this content, and decided it was worth their euros to make something happen, to trigger an act, to participate even from a distance. What were they buying? Not a product, not really a service. They were buying agency, power, the feeling of making something happen in someone else's life from the safety of their own screen. That's the real innovation of this business model. It's not just passive viewing, it's interactive suffering. You're not just watching someone be degraded, You're the reason they're being degraded. You caused this. You matter. And for people who feel powerless in their own lives, that's intoxicating. The stream's audience wasn't uniform. Some people probably stumbled in accidentally. Some watched for a few minutes and left, disturbed. Some watched longer than they intended, caught in the same morbid curiosity that makes us slow down at car accidents. And some donated. Those people, the ones who paid, they're part of this story too. But we don't know who they are. The investigation hasn't publicly named any audience members. There's no indication anyone who donated will face legal consequences. Because how do you criminalize watching? How do you prosecute curiosity, even if that curiosity funds abuse? We've created a system where the audience is invisible but essential, where participation can be laundered as mere observation, where you can be part of someone's death without ever leaving your living room, and maybe without even realizing what you were part of until the live stream stopped. That invisibility is the whole design. It's why this works. It's why it's spreading. And it's why Raphaël Graven won't be the last person to die this way. Let me take you back to something I said at the beginning. This isn't a story about death. Because here's what I've come to understand, walking through these facts, watching this investigation unfold. Raphaël Graven didn't die on August 18th. Not really. He died gradually, over months or years, as the person he was outside the camera became less real than the persona inside it. The medical death, the moment his heart stopped, that was just the moment when the physical finally caught up to the psychological. The autopsy found no trauma, and everyone seized on that as exoneration. See? Nobody killed him. It was natural causes, medical issues, bad luck. But what if the trauma was cumulative? What if it wasn't in the blows that weren't struck, but in the 12 days without real sleep? In the years of performing degradation until you couldn't remember what dignity felt like? In the slow erosion of every boundary between person and product? You can't autopsy that. You can't put that under a microscope and point to the exact moment the soul gives up. But it kills you just as dead. The toxicology results weren't public when the latest reporting came out in September. They're still pending, as far as we know. When they come back, they might show substances, stimulants, maybe to stay awake for 12 days, sedatives to manage the crash. Who knows? But they might show nothing. Clean system. Just a man with a bad heart who pushed too far. Either way, here's what they won't show. They won't show the dopamine hit of seeing your viewer count climb. They won't show the addiction to attention, to matching, to existing in other people's eyes. They won't show the psychological dependency on an audience that loves you and hates you in equal, intense measure. They won't show what it does to your brain when your survival, financial, social, psychological, depends on being watchable, on staying performing, on never, ever being boring. Because boring is death in this economy. Boring is irrelevance. Boring is the algorithm forgetting you exist. So you keep going, past exhaustion, past reason, past safety, until your body makes the decision for you. Owen Senizandati, Naruto, Safin Hamadi, Safin. They were there when Raphael died. They'd been there for much of the 12-day marathon. They were part of the content, part of the machine. The reporting calls them co-streamers, people under investigation, banned accounts. But I wonder if they're also victims. Not in the same way as the vulnerable participants documented by Mediapart, but victims of the same system that killed Raphael. Because here's the thing about exploitation, it rarely has just one layer. The people running the machine are often trapped in it too, unable to stop, because stopping means admitting what they've been doing, means losing their income, their identity, their purpose. Maybe Owen and Safin are predators who saw vulnerable people and built a business model around cruelty. Or maybe they're three people who got caught in the same trap, and Raphael just happened to be the one whose body gave out first. I don't know which is true. The investigation hasn't concluded. No charges have been filed. We're still in the territory of questions, not answers. But I think it matters that we hold space for that complexity, that we resist the urge to turn this into a simple story with obvious villains. Because simple stories let us off the hook. They let us believe we'd never be part of something like this, that we're different, better, more aware, Complex stories force us to ask harder questions, like, under what circumstances might I have done the same thing? So where are we now? September 2025. 7 weeks after Raphael's death. The French government is pursuing legal action against Kik. That's unprecedented. Historic, even. The investigation into violence against vulnerable persons continues. Owen and Safin are somewhere in that process. Interviewed, certainly. Charged, possibly. We don't know yet. The toxicology results are pending. Equipment has been seized. Hours of footage are being reviewed by investigators who have the deeply unenviable job of determining what was consensual and what was coercion. And somewhere, Kadu and the other vulnerable participants are still out there. Still alive, as far as we know. Still processing whatever happened to them on those streams. But here's what won't happen. The 300 people who were watching when Raphael died won't be held accountable. The donors won't be identified or charged. The algorithm that recommended this content to new viewers won't be interrogated. The system that made this possible, that makes it possible every single day on multiple platforms in multiple languages, that system will continue operating. Because we don't know how to stop it without stopping everything, without rethinking the entire architecture of how we monetize attention, how we platform content, how we define responsibility in a world where everyone is simultaneously audience and actor, consumer and product. This case is specific. One man, one platform, one marathon stream that ended in death. But it's also a mirror, and what it reflects is uncomfortable. We have built a global system that rewards the most extreme version of yourself, that metrics vulnerability and turns pain into content, that creates millions of tiny coliseums where anyone could be a gladiator and everyone could be the crowd, and the thumbs are always pointing down. And we participate, passively mostly, scrolling, watching, clicking, not donating, maybe, but watching. And in the attention economy, watching is donating. Your time is the currency. Your engagement is the fuel. So ask yourself, what's the most degrading content you've watched this week? Not this stream specifically, but the adjacent stuff. The cringe compilations, the public freakouts, the Karen videos, the content where the entertainment value comes from someone else's humiliation or suffering or loss of control. Did you watch it? Did you share it? Did you feel bad about it afterward? Or did you just scroll on? I'm not saying you killed Raphaël Graven. You didn't. But I'm saying we built the machine that did. All of us. With our clicks and our views and our willingness to look away from how the content we consume is made. And the only question that matters now is, what do we do about it? Caen, France. Coordinates, 43.815 degrees north, 7.317 degrees east. A village of about 7,000 people in the Maritime Alps. There's a house there where, in August 2025, a man died while the world watched. The investigation continues. Evidence is being processed. Legal arguments are being refined. At some point, maybe a month from now, maybe years, there will be verdicts, judgments, official conclusions, and they'll matter. They should matter. Justice, even imperfect justice, has value. But the real verdict came on August 18th, in the moment when 300 people realized the stream had stopped and someone in the room realized why. That moment when everyone watching had to confront the same question. What have I been watching? Raphaël Graven was 46 years old. He was a former soldier. He had health problems. He streamed under the name Jean Pormanove. And somewhere in those 12 days, in those 298 hours of continuous broadcast, he crossed a line that none of us could see. The line between performing and being. Between choosing and being chosen by the only identity anyone would recognize. He died the way we're all afraid of dying in the digital age. Watched but unseen. Visible but invisible. Surrounded by audience and utterly alone. The streams continue. On Kik, on other platforms. Different streamers. Different marathons. Different vulnerable people being turned into content. Because we solved one problem, Raphael's channel is gone, Owen and Safin are banned, but we didn't solve the problem. The system that created this is still operating, still optimizing, still finding the most efficient way to convert human suffering into engagement metrics. And we're still watching. Maybe differently now. Maybe with more awareness. Maybe with guilt, but still watching. There's something the forensic investigators do when they arrive at a death scene. They photograph everything. The body, yes, but also the surrounding. The context. The ecosystem that made this death possible. Because death doesn't happen in isolation. It happens at the intersection of systems and choices and circumstances. So when you look at this case, at Raphael's death, at the investigation, at France's unprecedented lawsuit against the platform, don't just see the body. See the room. See the cameras. See the 300 people watching. See the donation system. See the moderation algorithms that saw everything and did nothing. See the prior expose that documented abuse months before anyone died. See the preliminary investigations that moved too slowly. See the vulnerability and the exploitation and the defense of it's just entertainment. See all of it, because that's the crime scene. All of us. The whole ecosystem. And here's what keeps me up at night. Raphaël Graven defended this content, right up until he couldn't defend anything anymore. Which means somewhere in those 12 days, there was probably a moment when he could have stopped. When his body was screaming at him to stop. When stopping was still possible. And he kept going. Why? Maybe because stopping meant admitting failure. Meant losing the audience. Meant becoming ordinary again. Invisible again. Just another 46-year-old with health problems and nothing to make him special. Maybe because the performance was all he had left. Or maybe because he couldn't tell the difference anymore. Between performing life and living it. Between being watched and being alive. On August 18th, 2025, Raphaël Graven's heart stopped beating. But Jean Pormanove had died long before that. And 300 people watched it happen in real time, one view at a time. The investigation continues. Toxicology results pending. No charges filed as of September 2025. The streams continue.
J'y vais.